In the good times, just like the bad times, it's important to keep perspective on God's grace and love and the way that He has poured that stuff into our lives. Our faith in God, the God who made us, the God of the universe, the God who calls us to Himself, our faith in God shines when we make Him the center of what we do. The nation of Israel in the Old Testament, they had been through some tough times. After surviving 400 years of slavery under the Egyptians, they spent another 40 years wandering in the desert before coming to the Promised Land. This is this land that God had promised them so long ago. And we pick up in the book of Deuteronomy. We're going to be in chapter 6 in just a minute, where Moses is he's been the leader of this nation for these 40 years, and he's coming to the end. He's kind of giving them his last hoorah, his last little message as we get to the book of Deuteronomy. But time and time again, we're going to see throughout the Old Testament that the people of Israel, the nation of Israel, God's chosen people, that they fail. They fail over and over and over. God promises and God provides, and soon the people doubt again. Soon they fail again. And the story goes along. We see this nation standing on the edge of this promised land that God has promised, and God has delivered them into that. And Moses is going to give them these final words before they take hold of this promised land. So Deuteronomy chapter 6. And really, the whole chapter, verses 1 through 25, is really applicable to this. But specifically, we're going to look at that just the first few verses. So we're going to pick up in Deuteronomy 6 in verse 1 and 2. It says, "Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules, that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do well in the land to which you are going over, to possess it, and that you may fear the Lord your God, and your son and your son's sons, by keeping all His statutes and His commandments, which I command you, all the days of your life, and that your days may be long." Moses is reminding the people, as it starts out, that they are called to follow God and to teach others to do the same. He says that we would know God. In short, he says, we should know God and make Him known. But how do we do that? How do we become a people who know God and make Him known? So let's keep reading verse 3. "Hear, therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord your God, the God of your fathers, has promised you." I messed up that verse. Let me try that again. "Hear, O Israel, hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey." Verse 4, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might." That's the answer. Verse 5, that's the answer. So we're going to break this verse down a little bit and wrap our heads better around what this is saying to us. Verse 5, Moses' words ring true for us today. We are called to be careful to do the things God has instructed us. At the core, this is to love the Lord your God with everything, with your heart, with your soul, and with your might. Let's consider each of these pieces as we break this verse down. So we're Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5. We see the word heart. We're going to look at some other examples out of the Old Testament of where this same word is used in the context around it to kind of let us interpret what this might say to us. It's important, I think, to let the Bible interpret the Bible, not some random thing out there. So we're going to look at other verses using the same wording, the same context, in order to understand how this applies to us. Ready? So the heart. We know that our heart, there's a heart. It's an innermost organ, and it's what keeps us alive. Our blood pumps constantly through our heart. Right? So we see this word heart, and you think, there's an organ called a heart. If your heart stops beating within minutes, you're dead. Easy. The word usage here in Deuteronomy, though, is much deeper than this organ, this blood pump in our chests. This is describing the inner man, the mind, the will. So let's look at these other uses. If you look in Genesis chapter 20, and I'll read this to you, verse 5 and 6. It says, "Did he not say to me, And you can go read the context around this story. It's fun. Deuteronomy 20. I'm reading verse 5 and 6. Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands, I have done this. Then then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart. And it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. You can go read the context of that. It's a fun story. But the idea here, that word heart, the integrity of my heart, and the innocence of my hands, the integrity of my heart, it's the same word that we're seeing in Deuteronomy. That word in the ESV is the same word used in other places of the idea of the inner man, the mind, the consciousness. That in verse, let's go to Exodus 14. And this is as the people of Israel are making their way out of Egypt, out of slavery under the Egyptians. It says in verse 5, when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed towards the people. And they said, what is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? When it says the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed, the same word mind right there is the same word heart used in Genesis 20. It's the same word of heart used in Deuteronomy that we're looking at. Then in the ESV, that word, the inner man, the mind, the consciousness, right? That Pharaoh and the Egyptians, they changed their mind about the people of Israel. They decided not to let them go after all. We don't want to let these people go. Our will is not for these people to leave our service. Same thing as we look in Leviticus. So going over another book, Leviticus 19, this is verse 17. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. The simple command right there in Leviticus uses the same word heart, the same original word. Don't harbor hate for your brother in your heart, in your mind, in your inner man, in your conscience, right? In your mind, in your will. We're called to love God with all our mind, all our heart, all our will, all of our inner man, our inner person. Not just words, not just while we're at church or in a small group or around our Christian buddies, but in everything our mind engages, everything, always, everything that our inner man, our conscience, our mind is investing in, we are called to love God. The next word that we see in Deuteronomy is all our soul. And this really is kind of the essence of the man. So we're going to look at the same thing. We're going to look at about 3 different places in the Old Testament where the same word is used and put some context around what we're doing here. So the soul describes the very essence or nature of our being. This is who we are, far and above what we are. This is the portion that God has made that's going to live forever with Him. Our soul, right? That our flesh, this anchor, this flesh of mine, it will die. But our soul will go on for all of eternity. So Genesis chapter 2, right in the beginning of this creation story, Genesis chapter 2, verse 7 says, Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust in the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. The same word used for soul in Deuteronomy 6:5 is the word used for living creature in Genesis 2:7. So we got all your soul over here and all your living creature. So we got to do some dot connecting on this deal. The word living creature right here, when Adam received his breath from God, God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and he became a living creature, a living soul, right? Adam's essence changed from being a function of flesh to being indwelt by this living soul, this breath of life from God. His essence changed. This is a measure that sets us apart from animals, that we are given a soul making us who we are. Flip over to Exodus chapter 30, verse 12 says this, Exodus 30:12. When you take the census of the people of Israel, then each shall give a ransom for his life to the Lord. when you number them, that they are that there may be no that there may be no. Let me try that again. When you take the census of the people of Israel, then each shall give a ransom for his life to the Lord when you number them, that there be no plague among them when you number them. When you take the census, it says, then each shall give a ransom for his life. That word life, same word used of soul, same word used of creature. So now we're all over the place, right? That the census is going to be taken, that we're going to make an accounting for every one of the people. The same word right there is giving us this concept of this accounting for their lives, adding up, numbering, making a ransom for, an accounting of these lives to the Lord, right? Let's flip over one more time to Leviticus chapter 4. We're looking at verse 2, Leviticus 4:2. Look at the same word usage, and then we'll connect these dots together a little bit. Leviticus 4:2 says, speak to the people of Israel, saying, if anyone sins unintentionally in any of the Lord's commandments about these things not to be done, and does any of them, and you can keep on reading the rest of what's going to happen if you sin unintentionally. What I want to look at is the word usage right here. So in Leviticus 4:2, when it says, if anyone sins unintentionally, anyone is the same word wrapped up from the original language. In the ESV, it says anyone, right? It's describing anyone, any living person, any one of your people, any one of your creatures, one of your souls. If any one of your people sins, if you sin, this is who you are. If I sin, this is me. It's who I'm doing that, right? It's me. It's who I am. It's my essence. So when we look at that verse in Deuteronomy 6:5 that says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. That soul is the very essence of your being. It's the breath of life given to you by God. You are called to love God with this life, this essence, this soul that He has given to you. Not to give your life, your essence, your very being, who you are, not to give that to the world in its ways, but to give that life, to live that life in a way that is honoring to God. That you love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And might is the third one. That's the last one we're going to look at in here. We do the same thing. We're going to look in a couple places in Genesis. We're going to look at some word usage on how might plays out. So it makes sense when we think about, how do I love God with all my might? I get it with my will, with my mind, to focus my mind in on God and His ways and His things. And I get it with my soul, with my essence, with who I am, to love God. This becomes this overflowing cup. But let's think about the might and how that works out. So in Genesis 1:31, back to that original creation account, it says that God saw everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was morning and evening, or there was evening and morning the sixth day. It was very good. So the word very that comes before good right there is the same word used for might in Deuteronomy. It's describing how good the creation was on day 6. It's a measure of increasing goodness. God's creation was it was exceedingly good. It was abundantly good. It's over the top in its goodness, right? Same idea when we look at, if you go to the flood account, Noah's Ark, the flood story. It's Genesis chapter 7. Look at verse 19. In Genesis 7:19, it says, the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed so mightily on the earth. So Genesis 7:19, the word mightily is that same word. Mightily is describing the waters prevailing on the earth. They're not just trickling like a leaky faucet. It's not just drip, 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 drip. And they're not slowly passing by like a little stream in the mountains, a little babbling brook, just kind of running by. That's not describing how these waters are acting. They're not even roaring like a huge river. If you go stand on the banks of a river and listen to the water as it rushes by, and you see if something's thrown into that water, that it's just carried away. We're not even describing that. The waters are prevailing on the earth, it says. But they're not just prevailing, they're overcoming those bounds. They're flowing across the land. They're covering, conquering all they come in contact with. Even more than conquering, they're mightily conquering. They're dominating. The force of the prevailing waters is mighty, and nothing can stand in its way. That it's going to cover everything. Mighty on the earth, that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. All the mountains under the whole of heaven was covered. This water is prevailing to conquer, dominate, cover everything, right? Mighty, the same word mighty, right there. There's the same word very in Genesis 1:31. It's the same word in Deuteronomy 6 when we're going to talk about all our might. Okay? One more spot in Exodus. Just to get another accounting of this word, to put this word might in the proper little slot in my head. Exodus 19:18. Exodus 19:18. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended in a great in it. Just reading's hard. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke went up like smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke because the Lord had descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. That word greatly, same word as mightily, same word as very, same word as might that we're looking at from Deuteronomy. So, in this, we see the intensity of the trembling of the mountain. The whole mountain trembled, but it didn't just tremble, it trembled greatly. This mountain shook with such force, right? This is an increasing, abundant, it's over the top, right? When we look at this idea that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. We think about this verse in Deuteronomy 6:5, to love the Lord your God with such a completeness and intensity that we might not be able to really wrap our heads around that level, that might, that overwhelming intensity of love. Because our word use of love, as you know, is flippant in our culture today, that we love tacos and we love basketball and we love warm sunshine and we love green grass and all these things are good. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with basketball and tacos and grass and sunshine. Those are good things. We apply the word love to all of these things in an equal context. So when we think of the kind of love that we're called to have for God, it makes all of these things elevated if we give it the same meaning, or it cheapens our love for God if we give it the same meaning. That we're talking about love and we're talking about love, right? We're talking about two different things, really. I like tacos. I like sunshine. It's not the same as this overwhelming, increasing, abundant, over-the-top love that we're called to have for God. We are called to love the Lord with all of our inner being, with all of our heart, with all of our consciousness, with all of our will, with all of what we are, but also all of who we are. We're called to love the Lord our God with our very essence, with our souls, with all of who we are, all of I have, all of what I am. But we're also called to love the Lord our God with all of our might. And that magnifies in everything we do. We think about the waters prevailing mightily, that the creation is very good. And we think about being called to love God with all of our might. This magnifies everything that we do. We are called to love God exceedingly, mightily, with a force that overcomes everything else that we might ever encounter. Our God is greater, and we are called to love Him greatly. But don't stop reading. Don't stop reading in Deuteronomy, and we're going to pick back up in verse 5. Because this idea of what happens when we love God in this way, when our life is wrapped up in God in this way, it flows out into how we live. And these next few verses really illustrate how that happens. So, verse 6, pick back up in Deuteronomy. This is verse 6. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. Verse 8 says, you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. We are to write these things. These things God has called us to do. We are to write them on our lives. That our lives are lived like an open book, that anyone who encounters us, anyone who sees us, anyone who knows us can read the things that God has done in our lives. We are to teach these things to our children. And you know as well as I do, my children learn much more by what I do than what I say. That we teach these things to our children. We teach them how to love God by them watching us and hearing us and seeing us love God. And we're to talk about these things always and in everything. That this love of God should be such an overflowing cup in our lives that it pours out in our conversations. It pours out in the way we live, the way we go about business, the way that we interact with our neighbors, with our friends, with our families, with our coworkers, our customers, our employers. That we talk about these things always and in everything. And we are to make these things the foremost thought in everything that we engage in. That anything that we're plugged into becomes steeped in, covered in, caked in this love that we have for God. And we're to share these things with anyone and everyone that we encounter. And that's our role today and tomorrow and all the days as we live out on the earth, is that we go on about life. We live our life. We go to work. We go to school. We go to the store. We go do whatever we're going to do today. But those things are coated in this covering of our love for God, our relationship with Him overflowing out and affecting everything else that we run into. That we live our life mightily, increasing daily in this abundant love through every fiber of our being for the God that made us. The God who loves us, the God who saved us, the God who equips us for all good works. Those works that He is sending us out to do, that He's equipped us for, are steeped, covered, coated in the love that we exude out of who God is and what He's doing. And when you do these, when I live this way, when you live this way, this fire that's burning over us, that burns in our lives, is going to spread. There's no way that we can live with a love for God like this, steeping everything in life with who God is and what He's done for us, and our love for Him and His love and grace and mercy on us. There's no way we go on living this way where our friends and our family and our neighbors and the world that we come in contact with doesn't catch that fire. There's no way that it doesn't spread. When I'm on fire and I come in contact with you, you feel that fire spreads. As the floodwaters prevailed mightily over all of the earth, I hope that the abundance of love for God might prevail over everything in your life now and in the future, that it covers over even the peaks of the mountains of the problems in our lives. Abundance of love. So here's the push today, to ask God to give you that heart that overflows with love for Him, because this comes from Him. We can't love unless God loves us first, right? God made us to be in a relationship with Him. So ask God today to give you that our heart that overflows with love for Him.